Welcome to Humanity Unshackled with me, Rusty Burridge, and David W. Wood. Our guest today is OmniFuturist Mike DiVerde. Mike, I hope I've pronounced that correctly.
That's perfect.
Welcome to Humanity Unshackled.
Thank you.
And I'm going to get a definition of OmniFuturist from you a little further down the line. What I want to know is who you are and how you came to be an enthusiastic futurist.
Well, I'm an aerospace engineer. About 40 years ago, I got my degree in aeronautical and astronautical engineering at the University of Illinois. And in the past almost 40 years, I've worked on 9 new aerospace vehicles, 2 rockets, 2 spacecraft, 2 Navy jets, 2 passenger jets, and a freighter. And so most of my life has been absorbed in aerospace. And relatively recently, maybe 2019, I came across the United States Transhumanist Party. And I hadn't been involved with transhumanism very much. And so that's what started my exposure to some of the more futurist ideas outside of science fiction. So I guess that's going to be a brief introduction to me.
So is that man and boy then? I mean, that career started like at 16 years old? Or
I graduated from college when I was 21 and started right away on that. So I'm really close to 60 at this point.
That makes you a rocket scientist, does it?
Actually, that's true. My issued patents are for spacecraft dispensers. When I was on the Delta III and Delta IV rocket, I came up with 3 different inventions for how to launch multiple satellites on a rocket. And it happened to be a really hot topic in 1998. Bill Gates was trying to launch a constellation of 800 or so LEO satellites. This might sound familiar to those of you who know Musk and Starlink. 20 years.
Never heard of him.
20 years before Musk, Gates had this idea that we were going to have these huge files, movies that were all the way up to 1 megabit that had to be transmitted, and you couldn't do it over a dial-up. So I did a number of proposals. So I've got 13 patents worldwide for spacecraft dispensers. So yes, I'm a rocket scientist.
Oh, that is cool. That is just such a lovely, lovely label to be labouring under, isn't it?
Yes.
As a quick aside to my paranoid, drug-addled friends, are you quite well placed to say whether the UFOs and UAPs are therefore terrestrial technology?
I have no idea. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, no. And I've never really worked a secret project, so I don't have any idea what they know behind closed doors. So unfortunately, I just have no knowledge.
Well, I can tell you my friend's response to that will be, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? Damned if you do, damned if you don't. So I'm going to ask you, it's kind of a double question, really. OmniFuturists and your involvement or genesis of them and their kind of almost like sole job to deal with what's called the economic singularity, which I don't fully understand. Would you like to walk us through that one?
Sure. Well, the term I just concocted, and the omni part is I didn't want a particular type of solution to rule our initial discussions. I actually wanted a diverse array of political and economic thought on how to approach the economic singularity. So that was kind of where Omni came from. And then, of course, we're trying to look a bit into the future. Callum Chase, in his book, The Economic Singularity, did a great job of talking about what might happen economically prior to the technological singularity, where AGI becomes super intelligent, way beyond human comprehension. Before that happens, we're going to see probably some artificial intelligence of varying levels of quality and capability that can do a lot of human work, the stuff that we do now, much more cost effectively. I want to say that I think that it's quite likely that in the next decade or two, there's going to be cognitive automation that can do just about any white collar, pink collar, blue collar job out there at less cost than it would be to employ a human. And that might mean just tremendous permanent technological unemployment. So circling back to your original question, I started this group as a single purpose study. What could we possibly suggest for that transition period between today and that future of flourishing abundance where we can prevent millions from starving or dying because they don't have enough money to pay for food or rent or healthcare or transport? How could we approach this? If we as futurists can see this coming, and a lot of people can't really maybe see this coming as well, since we can anticipate it, why don't we think about possible solutions? So that's as is typical of me, a very long-winded answer to a very short question.
Oh, you be as long-winded as you like. It makes my job easy. So I'm going to have to ask then, is it that the social physics is kind of set in and that the economic singularity is in every kind of conceivable scenario is always going to be prior to the hopefully liberating technological singularity? Is there no way we can invert that and get the tech singularity before the economic one, before we have to go through mass unemployment where nothing is future-proof, not even charismatic stand-up comedy? It's like, can that happen or not?
Yes. There's all kinds of possible futures. And there could be just wonderful ones that, let's say, a very benevolent superintelligence erupts from some lab and it wants to care for us. And it uses cognitive automation to provide flourishing abundance, just ridiculous overproduction of food and healthcare, and takes care of everybody. That could happen. It also could happen that politicians come up with a way that there's a redistribution of wealth. The United Nations could become very powerful and decide that for all countries in the world, this is going to be how we handle poverty, homelessness. There's all kinds of scenarios that could turn out great. My point to people who say there's a lot of folks who like to predict the probability of this or that, and say that it's what I'm concerned about is a low probability event. My response is, if it were to occur and we had the chance to plan, then we have failed in our duties to plan in advance for it. And what really is the cost of planning for this outcome? Very little, right?
Nothing. It's brainstorming all kinds of contingencies, isn't it? It's just like the ultimate sort of insurance installation.
Right. And so what's happened is that we can see a significant possibility of cognitive automation taking over many jobs. Okay, so there's a pretty good probability. It's not just Callum Chase's book. Aaron Bastani wrote Fully Automated Luxury Communism. Andrew Yang wrote The War on Normal People. There's a lot of articles that are talking about how this could come about that make you think that it's not some wild or ridiculous idea. And I'll say it this way, as I do to many people. Of course, every country has its own way of handling things, and my focus is on America. I just see it and I know it better than maybe I know Uzbekistan or Croatia. In America, the court systems have repeatedly shown that investors who sue a company for not maximizing profits win. This is something that is enforced through that fiduciary rule. The CEOs are required to maximize profits to the shareholders, the investors. And so if you've got robots that can think and act as well as your average human in most functions, but they cost less, they don't take coffee breaks, they don't have sick days, they don't have vacations, They could work almost round the clock. They don't need a pension. Then the CEO is required to let go of the humans that cost too much and hire on the bots that don't. There's like an economic principle that could undergird this possible outcome. So, but I think a little bit of planning on how we might approach this would be useful. I got one more aspect to this.
Shoot, you can take your time. I want to hear it all.
Different countries have different approaches, and I'm going to say in general, Europe tends to be more concerned about taking care of social aspects, social supports. The United States has more a habit of waiting until a catastrophe occurs and then reacting. We're hung up on an idea that, it's every man for himself, every man and woman. There's a lot of folks who believe that if you're poor, it's because you're lazy or you didn't work hard enough or it's your own fault. And therefore, there isn't a whole lot of compassion or pity for folks who aren't successful. And there's tremendous praise for people who are wildly successful. What I'm really anticipating, and the way I tend to describe this outcome for people, to put it in more concrete terms, is think back to the Great Depression. Think about how that affected people and for how long, how many years that lasted. And for those who maybe aren't that familiar with how gritty and how difficult the Great Depression is, you might think about either reading or watching the film The Grapes of Wrath. And watch these people get booted off their subsistence farming by ostensibly, the mechanized tractors that can do it better, cheaper, faster. And watch them wander about from what were called Hoovervilles, these little ad hoc clusters of plywood and tin shacks where they'd be harassed by the local sheriff and go from job to job trying to eke out a living. It was a tough time, and as you watch the movie, you watch the people pass away. This family that leaves, I'm going to say, the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma and travels out towards California for work that they heard is there. As they travel, people are passing away because partly disappointment, partly lack of food, partly a lack of support. You're going to need a lot of compassion to think carefully about what might happen. And the Great Depression is a good place for people to think about. So it turns out that this problem is not a brand new futurist problem, okay? There's a lot of folks who don't have enough money for food or rent or healthcare or transport now. In America, there are hundreds of thousands of people who are homeless, millions of kids who go hungry at night to bed. Any of these solutions that we work on could be tried out with the vast numbers of homeless that we see in America today. Anybody who's seen the tent cities on their local news knows what I'm talking about. Those tent cities are the modern equivalent of the Great Depression's Hoovervilles. A lot of these people...
Would Detroit be an example?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
yes. Or Seattle or Los Angeles.
No, I'm just thinking because in 2013, Detroit effectively died, didn't it, economically?
Yes.
It was like filed for bankruptcy as a city.
Yes.
And okay.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Carry on.
Oh, no. And there are many cities that have large encampments of homeless folks. And it's not necessarily a permanent condition. Like I was saying, many of these people are working poor. There's a very misunderstood aspect of the homeless. The percentage of folks who are homeless that are also drug addicts, alcoholics, mentally unstable, those percentages are the same among the homeless as they are among your local apartment building or your country club. There's plenty of executives who struggle with alcoholism or drug addiction. They're just able to continue in their function and earn money. So going back to the homeless, this is a mischaracterization of the homeless as being drug addicts out on the street because they want to be there. That's not accurate. Many of these people are the working poor. And another of my focuses is on the folks who are the farm workers of America. And not the farmers. The farmers who own the land are doing okay, don't get me wrong. But the folks who have to work picking the crops frequently live in substandard housing. I think I read recently that the average farm worker family of 4 earns about $17,000 a year. Okay, they're working and all they can make is $17,000 a year. This is poverty level for the people who feed us. So anyway, going back to the focus, one of the things that I'm trying to do is take my preferred version of how to approach the economic singularity and apply it to homelessness. And so I'm working on creating a farm worker owner co-op. We're just starting. It's a plan. It doesn't exist yet. But the point of this would be to see if at a local grassroots level, if you can find a way to help people survive the upcoming catastrophe of the economic singularity. Okay?
I'm going to say that model's already been proven, and in my kind of scripted questions, I was going to ask if, because of the whole, it's almost inevitability of the economic singularity coming before the technological singularity, if there were ways of riding that, and one of those was social enterprise.
Yes.
But it failed in Britain. But in America, there was a beautiful example of a bakery that used the model that you're describing, and they prospered very well. And so I thought that was one way of weathering the storm. So you can't blame the big factories for sort of going automated. I work in an automated factory. I work for H&M, the fashion house, and it's amazing automation. It's quite enchanting, actually. And so then you sort of retreat into social enterprise, the other one being universal basic income. And so there's two sort of social models there. So within OmniFuturists, are you sort of exporting like a little manifesto as to how people can do this?
That is the goal. And let's talk a little bit about what we're trying to do with the OmniFuturists. Let's go back to my original thoughts on Omni. Because the transhumanist community has been thinking about the bots coming, there's already a number of people who are already predisposed to thinking about what do we do when the bots do have our jobs. And luckily, the United States Transhumanist Party has a pretty large tent. So there are already folks who, for instance, are socialists. There are folks who believe that Georgism is a good approach. Another good example is one of the favorites within the group is universal basic means of production. This is a plan where you have a combination of maker spaces and tool libraries and neighborhood, say, farming or gardening, greenhouses.
Can I just ask you to define maker spaces? I'm a big fan of Make Magazine. Is it kind of related to the subculture that's attached to that with these people who are kind of DIY enthusiasts, gadget makers and preppers all in one? Is it like that?
It is exactly that. And the maker spaces is where a group of these guys get together and they generally lease out a spot and load that spot up with a bunch of specialized tools that maybe none of them could own individually, but as a group, they can share all these tools. There's a fantastic one in Everett near where I work. I'm in the state of Washington in the U.S. And so in the city of Everett, there's a makerspace that has all kinds of fancy tools that people get to come in and use by paying a small fee. So it gives people a chance to have equipment that they couldn't have in their garage.
Also, it's a very good opportunity for redeeming materials.
Yes.
I work at the waste end of the company I work for, H&M, and I've got to credit them on being rather amazing at the way they recycle materials and optimize and keep the minimum landfill. But occasionally, some very sexy kit goes past me, and like really beautiful. It's going to sound very nerdy. Very, very beautiful, perfect ball bearings, sealed ball bearing sets, and chains and polyurethane wheels that are used to run the robots that pick off the shelves, and they're kind of like large skateboard wheels. And some of this stuff gets past and it gets thrown away, and it's just like, no, in a makerspace, this is gold. Yes. And it's yeah. Yes. and yeah, sorry, I'm just enthusing.
Yeah, no. So back to Omni, what we're trying to do is gather together this wide array of thoughts, have each of them write essays. And we did that in 2022. Now, none of us are professional writers. None of us are professional economists or historians, but we're taking a hack at concepts. And that's really all I asked them for, is give us some good concepts on what might help us. So that was 2022. It's kind of a rough draft. And we were able to share that with some really important leading thinkers, thought leaders within transhumanism. And we've convinced a few of them to consider this group more seriously. One of them is a very well-known transhumanist author, David Wood. Okay, and he has joined us and given us a type of seriousness and authenticity that we would be lacking as a group of, let's say, a dozen amateurs. Okay.
It definitely does lend people kudos. I've dined out on the reflected genius of David, I've got to say.
It works.
Well, let me add a disclosure here. My name is David Wood. I am indeed a fan of OmniFuturist. I have to say that the people who are gathered, they may not be excellent, experienced writers, but there is a wonderful initiative and a wonderful creativity in their ideas. And through the discussions, I have learnt a lot. And I really want to encourage more people to tap into this problem statement that you've articulated very well, Mike, and to start to digging along potential solutions as well. The suggestions you've covered, like universal basic means of production and others, because we're going to require some big thinking, some joined up thinking, some sustained thinking to come up with solutions that are big enough for the scale of the problem we're facing.
And some hopscotch thinking as well. I liked in your introduction, you used the magic words to me, which is amateur enthusiast, or enthusiastic amateurs, perhaps. And that, in the fields of like entomology and astronomy, those sciences, amateurs make a massive difference. And citizen science is something that is taking off in a small but significant way here. Enthusiastic amateurs, and I'm sure a peppering of professionals as well, Mike, yeah?
Yes. And, as we're talking about this, I want to point out something about amateur enthusiasts. This solution that we're trying to work on should be, the goal is to help out the world, not a particular country. And this is a problem in a lot of technology areas. There's a serious lack of diversity. And in fact, this particular group has an acute problem in that we are almost all old white men. And so I would like anyone who is listening to understand that we would like to have more people from more perspectives. The Omni is not just different political and economic viewpoints. It's also different life experiences. One of the very few people who is not an old white man, Luis Arroyo, his heritage is from Puerto Rico. So he's got a little bit of this and that in his ethnic makeup. But we need folks from different countries. We need women who are looking at this problem. By the way, one of the authors of the 2022 Future Visions collection of essay was Kimberly Forsyth. And she was the one who wrote up about the universal basic means of production. She wrote a short book about it, and I excerpted portions of it to put into an essay. She's got many things on her plate. But anyway, my point is it's an appeal to anyone who's listening. If you're the group is limited to folks who can have a calm, data-driven, logical discussion. We would prefer to not have raving lunatics. Okay, this is a very difficult balance I'm trying to achieve. When you got somebody who's like libertarian, anarcho-capitalist libertarian, and a socialist, both talking to each other without insulting each other, without being nasty to each other, giving each other due respect as you continue the discussion. This is a hard balance to achieve, but so far we're doing it. So if there are thoughtful people out there who have different perspectives that would like to join in, we are looking for more thought leaders.
Also, I guess it's shifting those kinds of politics that you mentioned from being something you identify as to being something that you employ. You know, it's like if I'm teaching my children to cross the road, I'm a fascist. You know, there's one way to cross the road, and this is how you're doing it. If I'm on a lifeboat because the ship's gone down, I'm a socialist. If I'm at a car boot sale, I'm a capitalist. You know, so I think it's about employing political things in as a toolbox rather than saying I am something.
Yes.
There was a little bit of an exclusion on neurodiversity, isn't there? Because you don't want rabid lunatics in there.
Yes.
Which, yeah. So I mean, so I can come when I'm on my best behaviour, but otherwise, sort of wait on the fringe. Yeah.
Yes.
Fair enough. Are you dozens? Are you tens of? Are you hundreds of? How many are you? Would you say currently?
We are very tiny. Part of that is intentional. I had some bad experiences trying to do this out in a public discourse where Redditors would get on and drown out all the progress we were trying to make. Therefore, the group is invitation only. You have to have somebody who knows you and can vouch for you that you will be able to have a reasonable conversation without losing it. So we're on the order of a dozen. People come in and out because we're asking people to do this on their own time. There's no pay, and there's a limit to how much people can contribute to something that is on the order of a hobby. So no, I would say a dozen, kind of solid group, with some people coming in and out as time goes by. I think that helps us with our focus. I think that if we became more than a couple dozen, it might become unwieldy. My intention is never to make this some sort of a permanent organization that does different things having to do with transhumanism. There's plenty of groups out there that already try to do everything. I think that this is one particular problem that is of overwhelming importance. And so this is a single purpose group. Now, perhaps we join in with another group as a project to that group. There's a couple options that I've run across recently that I think are very impressive. One is a kind of a political action wing called Future Surge. And another one is called Transpolitica. And the advantage I have with that is I know the guy who's leading both of those, and his name is David Wood.
Well, I'll be very happy to host a public page on, for example, Transpolitica, that basically says if you're interested in OmniFuturist ideas, here's a brief summary, and if you want to engage further, click this link and somebody will get back to you. So that keeps the closed sessions closed because they are marvelous the way they work currently. They are diverse, they are spirited, but they are thoughtful and reflective. So we don't want to lose that. But on the other hand, we want to bring in another round of diverse thinkers.
I just wanted to say that would be very appreciated. We need a larger stage to get more attention. We're kind of off in a corner and not a whole lot of people know about us. So I think that would be the right kind of location for us to just have a little bit larger footprint than what we have right now. We certainly don't want to go on CNN, right? We don't want to be broadcasting to the world. We don't need thousands of people. We need a select group who are already kind of exposed to some of these concepts and think, you know what you haven't thought about yet that might be a very good solution? Those are the people we need.
Also, I think one of the reasons why it's absolutely okay to keep your numbers small is because you're effectively doing the job of a specialised organ. You know, you don't have to extrapolate and then become homogenised and then become killed by committee, killed by mutiny, and killed by apathy. So you it's like you formed a little rock band or a little,
yes.
and or a jazz band more likely, and so as a specialised organ, you do that one job. And you dock with people like Future Surge, and you dock with Transpolitica, and you dock with people, various social enterprises and laboratories even,
yes,
and think tanks, and then you inject what you have to inject, and then off you go, almost a bit like international rescue. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Let me take a moment to talk about next steps for us. So 2023, we hope to take the arguments we started, the essays that we started in 2022, add considerably better arguments, more thoroughly researched, reviewed, and prepared articles so that they can stand on their own and can stand significant scrutiny. And at the moment, there's like 8 articles, 8 essays that we've written. I think David Wood is starting to write one. We're trying to engage Callum Chase. There's a possibility that, let's say, we have a dozen really solid essays on potentials. The next step would be to take that collection of thoughts and have it reviewed by people who maybe are professional economists, professional historians, professional political scientists. I really like the potential of using something like a Delphi method, where a group of experts can review each of these in turn and rate them for their effectiveness. And if we go churn through these different ideas, perhaps we can build a consensus on which one is actually most likely to save the most people if we get to the economic singularity. The goal is not to talk about it. The goal is not to publish a bunch of papers. The goal isn't even to have a committee, a Delphi committee review and grade these ideas. The goal is actually to have something effective on the ground that helps people. And so as these essays are being written and perhaps others are reviewing them for their potential effectiveness, there should be on-the-ground pilot projects that literally try these out. And so that would be the complete vision of how to prepare. What might be happening, though, is the timeline might be telescoping in on us. It'll be very interesting to see how swiftly the businesses of the world turn to some of the rapidly advancing capabilities of cognitive automation to supplant or replace humans. And I'm going to just say that as I've watched what's happening over the years, I was not as impressed with playing chess or Go. I'll tell you what really startled me is when I could talk to my phone, it would understand what I said, and then it would answer my question. And if you think about most of the mundane tasks that are done in an office, if there's a machine that can understand what I'm asking and answer the question, it can probably do most of what humans do. Most of what we do day to day doesn't have that much variation. It's not so predictable that like a software do loop could do it, right? There is a narrow range of options that a person does in their job day to day. And if there's a cognitive automation that can sort through the options on how to approach a problem and suggest the best possible approach, they're going to be much more cost effective and supplant us. I almost never type anymore, and I love Midjourney. I've been using it a lot to make paintings. Of course, I could never do paintings, right? The creativity plus the cognitive abilities it's already got. It's not going to take that much longer before one company in an industry absorbs really good cognitive automation, and then its competitors are toast. I think it's going to be kind of a brutal grind. It'll be very similar to how the steel belt in America lost out to Asian competitors, and it went from being the steel belt to being the rust belt through middle America. Globalization wrecked a lot of the American economy, and a lot of middle-class jobs went away from globalization. I think we're all facing, not just the guys in the factory, we're all facing a serious threat to our ability to earn an income. And I think we need to think seriously about how to approach that.
And the risk is that a lot of the stuff is accelerating faster than even many of the technology forecasters had previously anticipated. Suddenly, the capabilities of these new AI systems, which are general in their nature, can be applied not just to transform one occupation, but to transform many occupations at the same time. So many people who previously were enthusiastic about embracing technology and seeing the economy grow, and who were convinced that they would be one of the winners of this new upswing in the economy, they are now at risk of no longer being one of the winners of technology, but being displaced because AI can do a lot more of their job than they'd previously expected. So I'm with you, Mike. This needs a lot of attention quickly, and it also needs re-evaluation of some of the cultural biases that you mentioned earlier, that CEOs are required to maximize profits, and that fiduciary duty is currently supported by a rich cultural admiration for anybody who is rich, hero-worshipping the people who have maximized profits, saying, yes, this is great, we should have more people like this, which forces companies, maybe against some of their own instincts, to remove expensive, slightly unreliable humans and to more rapidly embrace automation. So that switch needs to be reconsidered urgently, which is why the mission of OmniFuturists is particularly critical.
I think it's definitely ground rush, isn't it? I mean, I think, David, you were excited about 2035, and a lot of people sort of thought you were optimistic that the change would come as near as that. But I think it could even be a lot quicker.
We can't tell, and we should be ready for the possibility that there will be more disruption more quickly. Therefore, we need to rejig our social safety net. The social safety net that we've got in place now is probably insufficient. It's not resilient enough to cope with the many people who will unexpectedly be falling off the economic progress, who will be left behind. We can't be sure, but it would be irresponsible for us to say, well, it might not happen. And Mike, in the beginning, set out a few things that could happen. We could get very benevolent artificial general intelligence emerging and taking care of us all. But we can't bet on that. The probabilities for such a thing happening are just impossible to assess. Therefore, we must say there's at least a significant chance that there's going to be a kind of a repetition, a modern repetition of the Great Depression with all of the pain and anguish that involved. Although it would be even worse nowadays because some of the people who are left behind will be able to access terrible weapons of mass destruction and inflict a kind of vengeance on the rest of us. So something like that could happen unless we are thoughtful enough and focused enough and joined up enough to produce alternatives.
We're definitely running out of time, so I'm going to press Mike for a couple of things. In a way, you're kind of creating a survival package, a ration package, a kit for what is to come, or at least proposing what that kit might have to be, yes?
Yes.
And also you have, as part of your bibliography, a handful of books and a podcast, yeah? Can we quickly get a one-line description or one-line reason as to why people want to refer to these? So I've got in front of me Fully Automated Luxury Communism, by Aaron Bastani, yeah?
Andrew Yang, The War on Normal People.
Yeah.
Okay. Those would be 3 really straightforward books on the economic singularity that people could read.
Okay, and you've also listed Technocracy, I don't know how you pronounce it, in America by Parag Khanna, yeah?
Yes. Oh, that's a particular economic and governmental system, one of a dozen that could be considered. But the first and foremost one, of course, is Callum Chase's The Economic Singularity. That was the introduction for me to the concept, and it laid out in very clear terms why everyone has to be concerned, not just the guy on the factory floor.
So that's our entry point, isn't it?
It is.
That book. Yeah, okay. And be assured that'll go in the show notes. Yeah. And Holocracy by Brian J. Robertson, correct?
Yeah, that's another one that's a specific governmental system. By the way, my favorite version of how to approach this is distributism. Very odd, probably never talked about system. The 2 books on that, Hilaire Belloc, the book is called The Servile State, and Race Matthews, Jobs of Our Own. If you'll permit me a few minutes.
I'm good with that, David.
Please do.
Real quick. On distributism, I just want to point out that for realpolitik, we have to have something that is not a tremendous change, a shock to the system. So it'd be better if we could use things that already exist that people have seen to institute distributism, for example. And there was a very recent podcast on distributism that says that it's a credit union system. It's a credit union economy. Credit unions and co-ops are a way in which we could have for-profit enterprises, but for a group of people that maybe are struggling to survive as a group. Very similar to the maker spaces. So where I'm trying to look for is as people become homeless or unemployed, there may be a way to gather them together in smaller groups and form these co-ops so that they can feed themselves and house themselves, because I have to suspect that the American federal government is not going to provide an umbrella for these people. They're going to be on their own. So that's my pitch, real brief pitch for...
May I add to that?
Sure.
Mike, yeah, the idea I had was, and the metaphor I used was papier-mâché, because I wanted to do it via social enterprise, and the way that you did it was like you wouldn't have to globalize, so that you'd have to put this whole damn thing in place for it to happen. You would do it on a neighbourly basis, a cul-de-sac basis ad infinitum. I lived on a beautiful council estate in Southampton, which is so wonderful. I can't tell you how much. There's simple council estates, what you might call the projects. Papier-mâché was that you, instead of, like you say, a shock to the system, you build this like shadow. There's like biology 2.0, but like society 2.0. You don't have to violate. You don't have to break the rules. You don't have to change legislation. You just create these like little like Soviet cell initiatives, and then the previous one either withers and dies, or you like it does, or you can pop it, whichever choice you make.
I describe it as a parallel economy,
which is probably a better way of describing it.
Yeah, I will say that in Washington State and probably other places, Washington State has a special form of corporation called a social purpose corporation. And this type of corporation is specifically exempt from the fiduciary duty that most normal corporations have. It's formed with the idea that, yes, it's for profit, but you can have a social goal in which your profits maybe are lowered a bit so that you can achieve a social goal. That's how I'm going to approach it, is I'm going to create a for-profit farm worker owner co-op that is a social purpose corporation.
Inspired. What is interesting about this episode is that it is kind of a low-tech episode as a way that we, I'm pro high-tech. I'm excited by high-tech. I want the giants to walk the earth very soon. But I'm kind of excited about a way that if there is going to be economic doom or economic horrendous turbulence, that we've maybe got a wonderfully socially cohesive way on a small individual cul-de-sac level and coincidentally on a global level or subsequently on a global level. I'm excited. This is a lovely episode.
Let me point out that not everybody's going to be able to go out to the cornfields and do this. So vertical farming in urban areas might be an approach that is high tech and still could be a co-op, farmers co-op, but in the city, in maybe an abandoned warehouse where one of the factories is closed. So
but it's not just about food production, is it?
No.
It's about any kind of business, any
Yes.
kind of tool. Yeah.
Yes, like the maker spaces. You'd want that.
Yes,
as well.
which
Yes.
is wonderful. Yes, I can't recommend enough the whole how that thing has taken off in a relative. I think it's 2013 is when it started, and it's massive and it's so
Yes.
engaging and what's great is that is very much about young people and old people and male and female, and it just doesn't exclude anything.
I'm going to suggest that we come back in a subsequent episode to one or more of makerspaces, the distributism, technocracy in America. I think these are critically important topics, and we ought to give them more space rather than just crushing them into the last few minutes in this episode.
Agreed.
I'd love to.
Can we do that relatively soon, Mike and David? I'd be so up for that.
Sounds good.
Okay. Brilliant. Mike DiVerde, so much we've kind of crammed in, but as David suggested, we're going to do this again and possibly again and again. And thank you for being on Humanity Unshackled, which is more like humanity double buckled for what is to come. David, thank you awesomely for bringing Mike to the equation. It's been brilliant.
It's added up to something much bigger than any of us individually.
I'd like to thank you both for having me on. I had a great time.
And I did too. Thank you.
Me too.
Okay, that wraps it for this episode of Humanity Unshackled. And we'll see you again hopefully soon. Everything you've heard about in this conversation will be in the show notes, both on my sites and David's sites and transhumanist sites and everything, and hopefully on Mike's sites as well. Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you.